Pisa la pelota Maradona. Arranca por la derecha el genio del fútbol mundial. Y es el tercer gol de Crema Borruchaga siempre Maradona. Genio, genio, genio.
Hi everyone, I'm Bhaskar Sankara, and 2020 unfortunately has gotten even worse. Enemy of Jacobin, Henry Kissinger is still here, and now one of our great heroes, Diego Maradona, is gone. I grew up in a household of immigrants, and generally in the global South, you're given two choices, especially if your country has a terrible football team. You're either a Brazil fan or you're an Argentina fan. And in my household, we were Argentina fans. My sister was she was born on February 26, 1985. I'm sorry, Priya, if I'm giving away your age. She was going to be called Maradona by my dad. My dad was such an enthusiast. If she was a boy, luckily she was not called Maradona. Though it would have been really cool because my dad was early on the Maradona bandwagon. I think in '82 he just was fully committed to Maradona, so a little bit earlier than some other people. And of course, he had his magical run in '86. He was unfairly done in 1994. I'm not sure what Nando thinks about that. We'll get into it. So yeah, we heard the news today, and obviously Maradona is a very complex figure. He was incredibly flawed as a human being in many ways, but he really was. This is a cliche, but it really applies to him. He's a larger than life figure. He's a figure for the ages. He was someone who made a huge mark in culture beyond just soccer. He was a figure who had very eclectic political views, but the one constant is he always saw himself as a champion and a defender of the downtrodden and oppressed. He was someone who embodied the athlete who never forgot his roots and always stayed true and authentic to them. And if anything, I think a lot of people worried for Maradona's health in many years past. Recently was probably him at his more cleaned up, now kind of respectable, middling Mexican manager part of his career. But unfortunately, he passed away today. We immediately reached out to Nando, who agreed on just a couple hours notice to give us some of his thoughts on Maradona. Nando did a great podcast, which I happened to listen to a few weeks ago, actually on Maradona, I think in 2018. Who was that podcast for? It was part of that big series leading up to, Gimlet. So Gimlet did a huge series that covered a lot of episodes. I think I listened to the Maradona one. There was one on Zaire's appearance in the World Cup that Nando narrated. So Nando, most of you on the channel will know, is a host of Weekends. Weekends is off, by the way, this Saturday, but it's on most Saturdays at 1 p.m. Eastern with Anna Kasparian and Nando. And I don't know where else to take it. I guess I want to just start with the trajectory of Maradona. If you could talk about his early life, kind of where he came from, especially before '82, before his entrance onto the world stage.
Yeah, so Maradona grew up dirt poor. He grew up in Villa Fiorito, which is what's called a villa, or a slum, like the equivalent of a favela in Brazil. In Argentina, they call them villas. Villa Fiorito in Buenos Aires, his house in his early years had no running water. He had, I think, like 8 brothers and sisters. And he grew up dirt poor, and he never, ever forgot it. But he was immediately kind of a phenom from a very, very young age. I think the first media reports about him were in Clarín, which is like one of the largest Argentine newspapers, when he was 10 years old, because he was already such a phenom in the barrios of Buenos Aires that they were already doing kind of press reports on him. And since that moment, since around the age of around 10 or 11, he was just always under the microscope. I mean, it was always known that he was going to be a great player. No one had any doubt. And, it's interesting because his childhood is kind of split into two, in which he goes from being basically just abject poverty to, he was still quite poor, but it was always assumed that he was going to be well off, because he became kind of like almost like a proto LeBron, the way LeBron was kind of followed, like every single move of his was followed, like when he was in high school and stuff like that. Maradona was kind of the same way. He came up through the youth system of a team called Argentinos Juniors, which is one of the teams in Buenos Aires. They're kind of known for being very good at developing young players. They're not one of the big teams in Argentina like River Plate or Boca Juniors, but they're known for being kind of very good at developing young players. They've developed a ton of young players over the years. And he made his debut as a professional soccer player for Argentinos Juniors in the first division of Argentina when he was still 15 years old. I mean, this is just like unbelievable to think about, like him playing with guys who are 30s, full-fledged adults. He was 15 years old. And, at the time they didn't televise all the matches. So a legend of Maradona started to grow, because only people that went to go see him in the stadium really got to see him. I mean, like the sort of big weekend games that were broadcast on national TV were usually the bigger teams. But the sort of hype about Maradona started growing. I mean, the legend has it, and I don't even know if it's true or not, but like sometimes the legends are more fun than the reality, is that when he came onto the field for Argentinos Juniors the first time, when he was just a 15-year-old kid, he came in the second half, and the first ball he touched, he megged his defender, like he put the ball between his legs, and apparently the stadium went insane. And I mean, that just started like a trajectory that was unstoppable from the very beginning. I mean, and always with Maradona, like, and every single team he played for, and even when he was still a teenager, it was all about him elevating the level of people around him. This is something that you hear over and over again. There's a Spanish TV channel actually made a very good documentary about his years in Argentinos Juniors before he became the international icon that we all know. And again, a lot of these matches weren't televised. There's limited amount of footage about it. But they sort of interviewed people who were there, teammates and things like that. And they all talk about throughout his career just how gregarious he was, even though he was clearly better than everyone else and he was used to playing with players who were much, much worse than him. He was always eager and willing and available to help his teammates elevate their game. He wasn't like the superstar that would berate someone if they messed up an easy pass or mistrapped one of his beautiful passes or missed a shot that he like put him one-on-one with the goalie and then they would miss him. Like, he was always very encouraging, very gregarious, especially with players who were not at his level. That was always something that was critical to understanding Maradona and his success as a player. So, yeah, I mean, those were kind of his early years. I mean, it wasn't until he went to Boca Juniors in 1982 that he started getting really international fame. I mean, the first taste that people got of him around the world, because, again, like, it's not like back then you couldn't just, like, watch a online stream of an Argentinos Juniors match. You just have to, like, hear reports about it in newspapers and things like that. Was he got called up to go to represent Argentina in the Under-20 World Cup in 1979. In Argentina won the World Cup in 1978 that was hosted in Argentina, very controversial World Cup. You can do a whole documentary just about it. It was at the time of the military dictatorship, but there was a tremendous popular pressure for the coach to call up Maradona, who was still just a teenager, to the first team to play in that World Cup, and he narrowly missed out on making the team. And he was incredibly devastated about it, reportedly. And the coach was like, no, I want you to be the leader of the under-20 team that's going to play in the World Cup next year, in the under-20 World Cup. And it was actually the same coach who coached both teams. And he brought Maradona, and the tournament was played in Japan. And Maradona like dazzled the world. They won the World Cup, the under-20 World Cup. He had some incredible plays. This is like one of his most famous plays. He's still a teenager, and he does this Rabona, which is he wraps his leg around his other leg to cross the ball and puts it perfectly on the guy's head. Mm-hmm. This is in the U20 World Cup,
and they
crazy.
But he was only at Boca for like a year, right? I think he's associated so much with his time there, right? 81, 82, but it just like I don't know how many games I don't have in front of me, but it's like 40 games, something, something like that. So he's a figure who lives up to the hype. He's from a very young age, kind of elevated onto this pedestal, and then after that, he's transferred to Europe, right? And before Napoli to Barcelona.
Barcelona, yeah. And so when he goes to Barcelona, so in his time in Boca, he gains a reputation as being the best player in the world. He was already kind of gaining that reputation. By the time the 1982 World Cup rolls around, there's still talk that he might be the best player in the world. Argentina totally puts in a disastrous performance in the 1982 World Cup. I mean, you could do a whole other documentary just about that. I mean, it was at the time of the Falkland War, and the propaganda machine within Argentina was telling them that they were winning the war. When they traveled to go to the World Cup, which was held in Spain, actually, they had to do a stop over in Brazil. And when they got to Brazil, in the airport, they started seeing news reports that actually they were losing the Falkland War, and all the players were just kind of really thrown off by it. It was a very, very kind of tumultuous time in Argentina, and it really affected the team. And they put in a disastrous performance. Maradona gets sent off in his final game. He gets a red card, but he gets transferred to Barcelona, and at the time was the most expensive transfer in history. And he shows up to Barcelona with a ton of hype, and he's this working class kid, very unpolished, very uneducated. It's not like today where they would like put a team around some young hotshot superstar, like the publicist and a nutritionist and a personal trainer. Back then it wasn't like that. And Maradona, who's like this like very like I said, very unpolished guy, shows up at Barcelona, which is a very kind of patrician club, very gentlemanly, if that makes sense. They like things a certain way. They don't like a guy who doesn't buy into that whole thing. It's always going to be a challenge for a player at Barcelona, and he really struggled. I mean, he got hepatitis, which really threw him off. He broke his leg in a very gruesome tackle. It was like a very famous match against Athletic de Bilbao. A guy named Goicoechea broke his leg. And when he came back, the next time they played each other, Maradona went after Goicoechea and started like this basically street brawl, kind of like the Malice in the Palace, but in soccer. Just like the whole just benches cleared, everyone fighting each other. So he really struggled in his 2 years at Barcelona, although he did put in some amazing performances. I think that there's like this kind of idea that he was a huge flop. And while he didn't transcend the way he did in other places, like at the times that he was healthy, he played he did unbelievable plays. I mean, there's a famous story of when he got a standing ovation at the Real Madrid stadium, which is their most hated rivals. He did amazing things, but he just didn't really fit in to the vibe of the club. They didn't like this guy who, liked to party, wasn't very professional in terms of doing things the right way. He wasn't, like one of those guys, like, you know what I mean? He did it his own way, and he needed. Yeah.
So the fight was provoked by not the same player, but the same team that had done a dirty tackle on him a few months prior, and allegedly like said a bunch of slurs to him about his heritage. Is that actually true? I mean, that's like, again, half the things I hear about Maradona, I heard from my father, I just assume is apocryphal, you know, because he buys every single thing. Maradona didn't
Right.
even do drugs as far as he's concerned. The
Right.
CIA like planted it on him.
Yeah, I mean, who knows? Like what's said? Like among they didn't have mics that at the time. It's it's unclear like what was said and all that stuff. But it is true. It was the same team. It was Athletic Club de Bilbao, the team from Bilbao. Yeah, I mean, you look at the footage on YouTube, it's crazy. I mean, it's like it really is like the Malice in the Palace, just like a full-on street brawl. And yeah, that was kind of like the final nail in the coffin of his time in Barcelona. And he very quickly was looking for a way out. His reputation was kind of tarnished. He still hadn't won the World Cup in 1986. He was kind of seen as like maybe he's the kind of guy who can't make it at the top level in Europe. And the story of his transfer from Barcelona to Napoli, which is a poor club in a poor city, with no tradition of winning. No, it wasn't like one of the big clubs. Like they'd never won a league title. They were completely bankrupt and in debt. And the story of how that transfer, which was at the time the second most expensive transfer in the history of soccer, the first being Maradona from Boca to Barcelona, is just fascinating because it was basically organized by like this intermediary who had organized a charity match between Barcelona and another team from southern Italy, which had just suffered a major earthquake. And it was kind of like Barcelona was doing a charity match to raise funds to help this region that had just suffered this major earthquake. And the intermediary was told, by the way, this is great, but like Maradona isn't going to show up to play. And the guy's like, why not? I'll pay him a bonus to come and play in this charity match. Like he's part of the draw. Like he's a huge major international superstar. And they're like, no, he's having trouble with the club. He's like in a fight with them, and he's just like refusing to play for them anymore. So then that guy was like, oh, maybe he's like available. Like, and he started calling up all the teams in Italy. And at the time, before, you could only have 2 foreign players on your team in Europe. So like if you were like any team in Europe, you can only have 2 foreign players. So he called up like all the other teams, and some of them were like, yeah, we love him, he's great, but like we already have our 2 foreign slots are already kind of taken up by this guy and that guy, or I don't know, he seemed to struggle at Barcelona. I heard he parties a lot. I heard he made like cocaine. So the only team that really took him or wanted to take him was this poor team that had almost just been relegated that year. Like, I mean, they literally almost got relegated to the Serie B, the second division. And apparently, like when the owner of Napoli heard that Maradona was available, he like went to like the local politicians in Naples to sort of see if they could call up their friends that like ran banks to see if they could loan them the money to do this transfer that they had no business affording. Like it was like the second most expensive transfer in the history of the sport by a team that was absolutely broke. And if you watch the Asif Kapadia doc on Maradona on HBO, you see like when Maradona arrives at Napoli, he clearly has no idea what he's walking into. Like he's barely even heard of it. He's it's not a team with any tradition, and he's just kind of very earnestly telling everyone that he thinks he's going to win the league with them and that he wants to take them to the top. And everyone's like kind of rolling their eyes because Napoli has never won anything.
And also,
at the time, Maradona hadn't really won.
For people who aren't huge, fans, like it's not a sport like basketball where one superstar can totally transform things. You're 1 among 11 on a pitch, and yes, a great player makes an impact, but only so much. And I actually don't know anything about Serie A in the 80s, but I for like the 90s and onward, at least, the reputation was for kind of very defensive, like grinded out games. And it would seem on the abstract that like Maradona's like flair and style would actually have been better served in La Liga and not adapt well to Italian soccer.
You're right, but what did fit with Maradona was the overall vibe of Naples versus Barcelona. Barcelona's like this kind of educated, cosmopolitan, filled with let's call it PMC types. And they don't vibe like Maradona. Just what didn't fit in. And even though Barcelona's style of play would fit in perfectly with a guy like Maradona, just the overall vibe of the city, of the club, like wasn't his thing. And when he got to Napoli, which, like you're right, Italian soccer has always been very defensive, very tactical. But at the time, in the sort of second half of the 80s and the first half of the 90s, the best players in the world were in Italy. Platini was at Juventus. The Dutch superstars went to Milan. The German superstars went to Inter Milan. It was just like, for whatever reason, the Italian league had gained a reputation for having the best players in the world, which is one of the reasons why Maradona couldn't find a place in one of the big teams when he was moved from Barcelona. But yeah, I mean, when he got to Napoli, he fit in. I mean, obviously he had his struggles at first. The team was very bad, but he very quickly understood the struggles of the city and its place within Italian society, and he immediately saw himself reflected in it. And another thing that Asif Kapadia talks about is that, like, and he makes a good point, that Napoli is like a sort of one club town. Like a lot of big cities in Europe have two clubs. Like Milan has two clubs. They have AC Milan and Inter Milan. Rome has two clubs. They have Roma and Lazio. Even Turin has two clubs. They have Juventus and Torino. Napoli really just has the one club. So everyone in the city is a Napoli fan. And Maradona does really feed off of kind of this universe, like everything flowing through him. He's like, he makes a deal with you. It's like, make me the man and I will reward you. He doesn't like to be kind of a cog in the machine. Like he's always compared with Messi, obviously for obvious reasons. Yeah. And Messi is kind of like, I talk about him as being kind of like the best first chair violinist of all time in the context of like the Vienna Philharmonic or something. You know what I mean? Like if in an orchestra in which everything is working perfectly, Messi will elevate you to hitherto unknown heights. Whereas Maradona almost needs you to suck, and then he will come and elevate you. And if everything's kind of working well, he'll kind of self-destruct and blow it up. Or if there's other players, people kind of vying for, responsibility within a team, he doesn't like that. He likes to be the man, he liked to be the man, and he really thrived off of that. And that's what always like that. That's why it was always like his performances have transcended so much, is because he took average teams, like very, very average teams. Like no one can name many players on the Argentina team that won the World Cup in 1986. It wasn't a stacked team. It was full of guys who were just okay. And they beat teams that were just absolutely stacked top to bottom. I mean, you look at the West Germany team that they beat in the final, it's like every single position has like an all-time great. Whereas Argentina had Maradona, but they won. So yeah.
Though in 78 they did manage. I don't know how many holdovers they had by 86, but they did manage to beat like the most like incredible. That Netherlands team was probably the most fun team of all time. Like those 70s total football teams.
Johan Cruyff didn't play in that World Cup, protesting the military dictatorship. It's actually a cool story, So and there's a lot of Argentina, that Argentina team in 1978. There's a lot of stories about that the military dictatorship may have rigged a lot of those matches. They qualified out of the first round miraculously. They had to beat Peru by like 5 goals or something, and they beat them 6-0. And there's a lot of smoke behind the idea that the junta basically brokered a deal with the Peruvian government to
Jack, the FIFA boss, Jack Warner, who was my mom's Spanish teacher in Trinidad, probably rigged Trinidad, or at least made sure that Trinidad got through the qualifyings to get to the World Cup. So we're doing it the old school way. But then again, we only have 1 million people. Argentina surely has the quality to win it fair and square. So I guess one other incident that we should mention that kind of gets into the class demeanor of Maradona and why his legend is so entwined with class, even if his politics were somewhat erratic throughout his life, is when he joined Boca, he refused a much bigger offer from River Plate. Is that true or something like that? and that was kind of the team that he always hated in his youth. Is like the equivalent of the New York Yankees, basically, just a more not quite as
They're
dominant. I
literally
guess at the time, probably, yeah.
Well, their nickname is the Millionaires in Argentina,
Mm-hmm.
los Millonarios. You know, like they're seen as like kind of the richer club. You know, they're seen as kind of the more upper class club in Buenos Aires, whereas Boca is seen as more of the working class club. Although like it's complicated, and there's tons of working class River fans, and there's tons of kind of ruling class Boca fans. But like in general, it's River is seen as kind of the more upper class.
Now it's getting more random, but traditionally sports outside of the U.S. had much more of a class connotation.
Oh,
Like in the
totally.
U.S., it's purely geographic. Like even Chicago, let's say, you would say that the White Sox you associate with more blue collar. The Cubs more upscale, but that's just because it overlaps with the geography. Like most Yankee fans in New York are in the Bronx and like East New York and East Harlem and places that like aren't particularly wealthy.
Right.
So much of his legends around 86. Obviously, then after his peak in 86, he has all sorts of turmoil. Most of it just self-induced from drugs, which if maybe they were planted by the CIA, I don't know. I would blame MI5 instead. But obviously, he's struggling with these things. He's struggling with this elevation from basically, to the most iconic figure in the world, really, and all the pressures that went with it. So, what happened with him in 1990 when the Argentine team did, I think, were the runners up or third place?
They were runners up. Yeah, they lost in the final. I mean, so at the time in 1990 World Cup, Maradona was still at the height of his powers. He just won his second league title with Napoli, which again is just not supposed to happen. Like it's as if it's hard to describe, but it's as if like a small college team won the national championship over like Alabama 2 times. You know, like it's just not supposed to happen. But
Leicester City.
Yeah, exactly. And so he got to the 1990 World Cup, which was played in Italy. And Maradona icon within it, especially in the South. And the team is really struggling. And Maradona is kind of struggling. He, for fitness, he kind of was like had tons of like little niggling injuries, but he still somehow wills this team to the final against West Germany. Before that, they played Italy in Napoli, in the stadium that he calls home, San Paolo Stadium, and they end up knocking Italy out of the World Cup in their hometown, which is just they didn't like that. Maradona ended up losing that final to West Germany on a penalty kick. It was very close, but again, he almost got 2 World Cups in a row, which is just unbelievably difficult to do. Like, I don't think a team has repeated World Cup victories since I don't know if ever. I mean, there's this very iconic moment of him in the San Paolo Stadium playing against Italy. Very controversial. Like, I mean, at the time it was like he started getting a lot of problems in Italy. There were sort of a lot of rumors about his drug use. Shortly after that, in 1991, he got basically suspended from the Italian league for 15 months for testing positive for cocaine, and he never came back. So it was kind of the end of his time in Italy, but he was representing his country. So like, what was he going to do? But yeah.
Mm-hmm. Pele did do it, though. Pele is not nearly as good as
54
as Maradona.
Yeah, 58 and 62.
But often they're treated as kind of, and I don't know enough about Pele to speak about it, but also Italy did it too, I guess, 34 and 38, but that doesn't really count. I mean, really.
No, that one doesn't count.
And also fascism. It's bad.
Very bad.
But I don't know enough about Pele to actually discuss their serious merits, but obviously in the pop culture imagination, Pele is the one who always was able to grab and retain the big sponsorships,
Yeah.
who took better care of himself, but kind of was seen as the more polished and corporate of the two, despite I think both having very humble beginnings, and Maradona being the more rebellious, iconoclastic one.
Yeah, no, I mean, totally. I mean, Pele was just, he's. I mean, if you ever hear him speak, he's not very interesting. He's not very funny. He's not, like Maradona. Like you hear him talk, and he's funny. He's got like a cheekiness to him. Whereas Pele is just kind of very, very kind of almost like an empty vessel. And he always chased the corporate sponsorships. He went to the United States.
He even tried to make soccer work in New York City.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean that was part of his. He was in a Hollywood movie with Sylvester Stallone. That Victory movie where they're POWs and they like.
That's a great movie.
It's a great movie.
I haven't watched it since high school. I have a feeling if I rewatch it, I'll be like, "Oh, this is actually shit." But I have very fond memories.
Yeah. Yeah, no, he's definitely not. It's for whatever reason, the athletes that are iconoclastic are the ones that endure. I mean, the sort of comp in America to Maradona would be like Ali, in that they did not conform to what the powers want their elite athletes to be. They just did not. They refused at every step of the way. They refused to play the game the way that they were told that they were supposed to. And at the time, it's very difficult for them. And there's a lot of, everyone always remembers them fondly. But, like Ali at the time, like half the country hated him, or maybe even more than half the country hated him. Same with Maradona, incredibly divisive in their time. But always, those are always the icons that kind of live longer than your just kind of standard athlete who is great but plays the game the right way.
So I guess we should transition to just talking about his politics, because that's probably what people want to hear from us, not just like. But I think it is worth talking, or at least mentioning, what happened to him in 1994. Basically, I guess the short version is he was incredibly out of shape. He was struggling with drug abuse and other things. And miraculously, in the lead up to 1994, it's like an 80s style movie montage where he's just getting ripped, getting ready. He's exercising. I think you have a little bit in your podcast about him just like giving just speeches about how he's sweating blood for his his country and his family, and like literally laying it all out. Then he gets off to an awesome start in the 94 World Cup. Then he's caught with a banned substance. Obviously, like, one could get caught with banned substance. This was one of the ones that's ambiguous because I forgot the name of the substance, but it's like one that's in everything. It's in like Claritin, but chances are he was using it for recovery, just to try to get back in shape and recover from injuries, which is an acceptable use in my book of steroids. And if steroids actually made you that much better at sports, then every friggin' jackass at the gym that I grew up with, every Guido pumping iron would be Barry Bonds. But you can't inject steroids. They don't make your legs any better. With Barry Bonds, they don't really improve your eyes. I think that was a famous Bonds reply. Like, what did I inject steroids in my eye? I don't want to now make this about my defense of Barry Bonds, the greatest baseball player of all times. But anyway, I meant this just as a segue to get you talking about 94, then some of his, I think, sadder later years until he finally retired in the late 90s, probably back at Boca.
Yeah. 1994 World Cup, after he was suspended in Italy, 1991 for cocaine, his career never really recovered on a club level. He played like a season at Sevilla where he was very overweight in Spain, and kind of had still always with Maradona, every time he can touch the ball and he can do something amazing because he was just a genius. But he didn't have the fitness to really compete at the highest level. And Argentina was actually really struggling to qualify for the 1994 World Cup, which was in the United States, held in the United States. And Maradona just sort of like comes back to life. I mean, they do like this whole, like you said, the Rocky montage, specific training regimen for him to get him in shape for the tournament. And he shows up and he starts playing remarkably well. Like, he looked like the Maradona of old. He scored an incredible goal against Nigeria. I think he scored 2 goals in that World Cup in the group stage. He's already like in his 30s, kind of like at the tail end of his career, but he was looking like the old Maradona. And that Argentina team was absolutely stacked, had tons of great players around him. They really did have a shot of maybe winning the World Cup. And after I think the round of 16 game, he tests positive for the banned substance and is kicked out of the World Cup. And then Argentina loses their next game. And he talks about like how it was like they had ripped like the heart straight out of his chest. It was kind of like this incredibly traumatic moment for Argentina. It's still discussed a lot today, like what the hell happened. There's people kind of like with like a Zapruder film type analysis of like the nurse that showed up in the field to like do the test. Like they're like everyone's like looking to see if the bullet kind of does like a magic turn or something, like like there's just this incredibly traumatic moment of when Diego was banned from the 1994 World Cup. And that was the end of his career with Argentina. He never really he never played again for Argentina. He had a few more seasons in the Argentinian league where he played for a couple different teams. He played for Boca, where he had a big yellow streak on the side of his head. But that was really the end of his career in any meaningful way.
Yeah. And by the way, someone does mention in the chat, which is worth bringing up, that it was ephedrine. Ephedrine, which is like in cough medicine, kind of clears out your respiratory system, and
it was very shady. I mean, doping in soccer is it's not like in baseball where there was like a ton of doping, or in cycling where there was a ton of doping. Like, there's never really been that many doping scandals in soccer. There's been some in Italy and stuff, but like it just doesn't give you as much of an advantage as in another. But
if your conditioning is off, then obviously you could get an edge getting your conditioning back quickly. But that's kind of beside the point. And we're more focused just on the big arc of Maradona, kind of as an introduction. We skipped over what really made him iconic on the pitch as a football player, which is the 2 goals in '86. But what the 2 goals are. I don't think we need to
4 minutes apart
talk about it.
Maradona's career perfectly encapsulated in 4 minutes, right? They were 4 minutes apart. Scored a goal with his hand in the quarterfinal against England in the 1986 World Cup. Here we're seeing it. He gives a good pass to Valdano here. Valdano, who mistraps it, and then he just jumps up and hits it with his hand. All the England players are calling for it, and he just runs off and celebrates. And it's like, you got to kind of be a genius, an audacious genius, to even try that. Like, I don't know. I played soccer my whole life. I would never. It wouldn't even cross my mind to do that. And he did it and got away with it. And then 4 minutes later, like, I just still can't believe that this is 4 minutes later, he does this, which is, again, considered the greatest
goal, and probably the greatest individual performance in sports history, just because it's not meant to happen in the game of soccer. That happens in ASO. Like, I've seen Billy Pfeiffer, in elementary school do that shit on an ASO field, but never since, besides for this goal.
Yeah. No, and like you look at the numbers of his performance in this World Cup. For example, I mean, he scored 5 goals and had 5 assists, which no one's ever done that. But he also had, I think, 57 successful dribbles or something like that, which is 37 more than the next guy in any World Cup ever. He was just absolutely unstoppable, like carrying a frankly mediocre team to
This
World
is
Cup
why
victory.
Messi has had such a miserable international career, because Argentine fans just don't really. I know they're in the greatest soccer-loving country of all time, but they have unrealistic expectations of
Yeah,
how one player can just will them to a championship, because they had it happen. So I think it's worth bringing up his politics, which again I
yeah,
think now a lot of us on the left, myself included, are totally going to overstate it, because we have lots of nuggets, lots of quotes, lots of pictures of him in a shade a jersey, or him with Castro or Chavez or whatnot. So I think maybe the simplest way to put it, and you could correct me, and you're the expert on this, but I would say he's someone who remained true to his proletarian roots. He's someone that always, in his rhetoric, always talked about the downtrodden, talked about the most humble people. And he's someone that always embodied in his rhetoric something that was in Latin American populism as a whole. In various forms, both the left and also parts of the right. And I think what people don't understand when they think about figures like Menem in Argentina in the 1990s, and these other figures in of the right in the populist tradition in Latin America, is that they married a lot of their policies, which are often quite destructive, with a kind of national popular rhetoric. So if you see him zigzagging, it's often him being, I think, attracted to a certain rhetoric of polarization against the elites, even though that rhetoric was often married to different politics, from Chavez to the not very good restructurings, the 1990s in Argentina.
yeah. I mean, I think that's a good point. I mean, I think the way to understand it is also. This is going to sound weird, but like in a way, kind of like Trump, in that Trump is kind of acts the way like a regular person would act if they all of a sudden got a lot of money. Maradona like always did that. He always sounded and acted like a proletarian. Like he always sounded and acted like a working class guy. He did not learn, or did not bother to learn, and did not want to learn the sort of bourgeois mannerisms, polite society. Like he had no interest in that at all. I don't know, like to compare it to like a figure like in the United States, like LeBron, for example. Like LeBron is very much like learned how to, talk like an elite and be amongst the elite. He's very comfortable in that environment, doing deals and producing movies and, athletic sponsorships. Like Maradona had no idea about any of that stuff. I mean, yeah, he loved getting a big paycheck, and he would often like kind of do stuff for money, but he wasn't like savvy in any way. He never cared to learn or wanted to learn. He always kind of maintained this real kind of working class affect that was born out of a true desire to always focus on that. Like never forget that. He never wanted to become something other than what he was. And again, I think that was reflected in his politics, and why he was attracted to figures like Chavez and Evo Morales, who he saw as similarly guys who came up from nothing like him to basically stick it to the man whenever they got a chance. And that was always his thing. I mean, he recognized the bully wherever he went, and hated it. Like he was always, and this is one of the reasons why his teammates loved him, right? I mean, his teammates always loved him. He always looked after his, the right back who was like not very good. Like he always had like a soft spot for that guy. Like he didn't like the sort of fancy kind of worldly players. He liked the sort of guys who he came up with. So yeah, I think that was reflected in his politics very much.
So often people talk about the decline of this kind of political figure in sports in general, and football in particular. So I guess, sorry, am I freezing up a bit? There we go. It's just catching up. My internet's very, very bad at the moment in the office. So anyway, often people kind of talk about the decline of this political footballer, this athlete that is a ham-fisted way, and not a way that's just about kind of showing up for a liberal philanthropy, essentially,
Right.
or just talking about the issues and awareness and whatever else in the Vegas way. I think about the NBA Reese jersey. But I guess what are the material factors making this less possible? Is it just that there's so much money on the table?
I think that
everyone's just become like Michael Jordan, where you know can buy too.
All right. Well, I think Bosker's Inner is correct, but I think I got the question, which is like, what are the material factors that have contributed to the decline in a figure like Maradona and to these kind of more modern players who are essentially brands, right? And I think that's very much true. I mean, the globalization and, for lack of a better term, like neoliberalization of global sports has contributed to that. In Europe, especially, there was a court case called the Bosman case, which really turned European football into a global sport, really exploded it as a global phenomenon, and money flood in from that. And with so much money at stake and so much money trading hands and the players getting paid so much more, they essentially become private corporations. They become brands. They all have their own LLC, and they have their publicist and their agent and their manager and their just the whole team around them, the guy doing sponsorships for them. It's just, and they are all media trained, and they're all trained to keep the money flowing. And the way the money flows is if you do not stick your finger in politics. Stay away from any of that as much as possible, especially if you have a lot at stake. I mean, sometimes you hear about players who are very political, but they're usually not the great players because they make a lot more money. So that really happened in the mid-90s, right at the end of Maradona's career. I think the Bosman ruling was in 1995, and that's what really turned soccer into a truly global sport. It used to be a very local sport where if you were in Brazil, you would watch the Brazilian league and that was it. Nowadays, if you're in Brazil, you still watch the Brazilian league, but you also probably check out the English Premier League or La Liga or Italian Serie A or whatever. That was not the case back in the day, and therefore, it just wasn't as big of a business as it is now. Now it's become like everything in life, commodified, and it's become a brand. So yeah, I don't know if Bhaskar is able to come back or not, but Kale, maybe you want to. There he is. People don't know, but producer Kale is Argentine. Es un argentino, boludo. ¿Qué clase de nombre es Kale, boludo? No se lo inventó ni su madre, boludo. Yeah, that's my best Argentine accent.
Un poco, Nando. Un poco. Yeah, we're waiting on Bhaskar to come back. He's having some internet issues. But if people have questions for Nando, you can throw them in the chat.
Fire away. Maybe
we'll try to get some questions in. But damn, I see. It sucks because I've come of age watching Messi, who is such a big disappointment, and in the sense that he's fantastic internationally, but then every single time there's a massive championship, and I think there's a number of factors going on, but it's not it just, when hearing this history about Maradona, it just sounds like an entirely different experience.
Like I said, Messi is unbelievable, and Messi's numbers are historic, and Messi probably will go down as the greatest of all time. But Messi does not have that charisma to elevate players to play around him above their ability. You know, he really is the great soloist in a great team. You know, like he really has played on historically good teams. I mean, the Barcelona team that he really thrived under was probably the greatest soccer team ever assembled in history. Was probably Messi's Barcelona. They had the best midfielders, they had the best defenders, they had a great goalkeeper, they had great forwards, they had great players. Every single player around him was great, including like 4 or 5 like all-time greats. Maradona really never played around that. He really was a guy who elevated others to play at a level that was way above their own. And to me, the most disappointing thing about Messi is not anything that he does on the field. I mean, he's amazing to watch. But it's when he opens his mouth. He is the most uninteresting guy to ever walk the face of the earth. He has just been completely sheltered from the world, whereas Diego was a man of the world. He was a man of the town. Messi has lived his whole life in a bubble created by his family and his entourage. He wasn't like Maradona. He wasn't partying with Queen in the middle of the night. No, Messi has grown up his entire life in a protective bubble that has made him almost like Arrested Development. Like he's almost like a child in a way. Like I almost feel bad for him. He's just like, he likes to play FIFA and that's it. And he just doesn't, you wouldn't know like what the hell, like he might not even know who like the Prime Minister of Spain is right now. You know, even though he's lived in Spain since I was little.
So I just logged back on, but I know you're talking about Messi. I just bet by he. Yeah, I mean that's so that's one thing with the rags to riches kind of story. One isn't that common because it is so damn hard and requires so many resources to develop a talent. Right, raw talent can get you somewhat far, but then often you need money and trainers and whatever else. And obviously sometimes like the systems in like for baseball in places like the Dominican Republic are really attacked, but they're the alternative for poor kids. Or what happened in the US with Weber and the Fab Five in Michigan. With the same sort of thing, like relying on resources when you're a poor kid to try to get ahead. Whereas now, like if you look at trends, let's say in basketball, it's largely middle class kids or people who have the ability to take advantage of their talents. And that's also the reason why you're seeing so many children of athletes become athletes. Like yes, in part it's genetics, but beyond that, it's just these are people with resources and access to expertise. But Messi was really just the story that everyone wants to believe in. Just like kids like kicking around like a rock amid trash, right? And then just something magical happening. And I think there's something of that really really appeals to people, and rightly so. Yeah.
Well, I mean, these days, a talented kid gets swallowed up by a professional club. At a very young age, they go into like the Barcelona youth system where Messi went to when he was 11 years old is run like a professional team. I mean, you basically have professional level development from the time you're a child, with coaches who are certified and work within a structure of a club, facilities, nutritionists, everything these days, it just happens at a much younger age than it used to. Maradona like did come up through Argentinos Juniors, but like in the 1970s on a small team, like it wasn't like being swallowed up by a rich European club at a young age. I mean, it's just different now.
So someone in the chat asked, who's a player that you think comes closest in spirit to Maradona these days in world football? I guess in Argentina for a while, I think it was Tevez, just in terms of his background and also just his mentality. He was just like a bulldog, but yeah, I don't know who it is now. And obviously Tevez was a great footballer, but never a top world class, footballer.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of like charisma and things like that. There's, the flawed genius that is like a guy like Riquelme, who, if you ask Boca fans like who their number one is, it's not Maradona, it's Riquelme. Like he was kind of a similar figure in that he was just like very much like kind of iconoclastic. He wasn't as good as Maradona, which is why he's not as well known. But within the context of Boca, Riquelme is like considered the number one. These days, in terms of like interesting players who, you can imagine. I mean, there's just no one. I mean, I don't see anyone these days who you see is like, there's tons of great players out there, but they're all just kind of living in these cocoons of corporate brands, essentially. Like they've just become brands, and you just don't see it anymore. Like it's just it's really sad. It's like everything has become like a business, and it's lost a lot of its charm.
And also like you don't have the same amount of homegrown players in the sense of a city or a region.
Yeah.
Like obviously a lot of European leagues have like homegrown rules still, which limits the amount of foreign players in a league or whatever. But I'm just talking about like someone growing up and playing for a team that they idolize, and that sort of stuff doesn't as often happen because at these small and medium sized clubs, like they have these youth academies which take in a lot of local prospects, but then they are trying to kind of sell them for a profit to bigger clubs, and essentially their youth academies are used as the youth academies of bigger clubs, and that's how they sustain like being in the same league as incredibly wealthy clubs. So the economics of it have all skewed, and in ways that are kind of a mixed blessing. It is I'm sure it's a good thing that the chances of being incredibly talented and being stuck at a marginal, second league in a not very prominent footballing country is like nil now, where we might have lost our greatest. There might have been a Maradona playing in like, Peru or something in the 1970s that no one heard of, but a lot of that has changed.
Yeah. No, and it's like everything in sort of our capitalist world these days, there is an inequality that is setting in, and there's a sort of concentration of resources around a ever smaller cadre of clubs. Basically, the top European, like the big 4 or 5 clubs in England, the top 2 in Spain, the biggest club in Germany, and the top 2 clubs in Italy, sort of are getting are swallowing up more and more of the resources, where it used to be that you could have a lot of great players kind of more distributed throughout the leagues. Like it used to be like, a mid-table team in Spain always had like 2 or 3 guys who, like given the shot could play at the top level, but they kind of stayed in those mid-table teams just because they made a good living. It wasn't guaranteed that they were going to make more money if they went to a bigger club and kind of struggled to find a place in the team. Whereas now it's all so concentrated at the top. It's just like a total upward flow because it's like, in the globalized world, like the biggest brands get to muscle out everyone else. Like right now they're competing for the attention of people and fans all over the world. And it's just very difficult for a club like Valencia or, like Roma in Italy to get the attention of a kid in Thailand or a kid in Nigeria. It's the 8 or 10, biggest teams that compete for it.
And also everyone would know that Maradona was disgruntled. That's the other thing. There used to be kind of like little things you would find out, but now like immediately the rumor mill would be out and big offers would be coming in. They'd be courted. The chat We should probably wrap up this stream soon because you're like choking, and also the chat
Yeah.
is getting a little bit weird. Someone's calling Clint Dempsey the Maradona of South Texas.
Well, I see the point.
but-
I see the point,
Oh,
though. Like,
of Clint Dempsey, great rapper too,
Well,
and excellent. It has good flow. I must say, he actually has good flow.
so like, there's the debate, right? And is like, who's the best American of all time, Landon Donovan or Clint Dempsey? And
It's
Landon
Claudio
Donovan
Reyna.
is like,
It's Claudio Reyna.
it's Claudio Reyna, obviously, clearly.
Right,
It's
position
Claudio-
player. And then goalkeepers. America just has a ton of fucking goalkeepers
Right.
because we could train these kids to play like basketball or volleyball, and then
Right.
they'll become good goalkeepers. Keepers. That's just a separate skill set that's not really related to the rest of soccer. But anyway, keep going.
No, yeah, but like Clint came up from, he's from Nacogdoches, Texas, and he, kind of grew up poor, and he is not very polished, and kind of, but whereas Landon Donovan is just perfectly polished and like very smart and educated and knows what to say all the time, like knows how to play the media like a fiddle. He's just very savvy in that way. So the media was always kind of much more comfortable with Landon Donovan, whereas they were uncomfortable with Clint Dempsey, who was just kind of more rough around the edges, hip. It's like the hip hop attitude versus the lunch pail players. Clint Dempsey always kind of suffered a little bit of that. So I see what they're saying.
Yeah, and also Landon Donovan would just say some shit like Ramike. I'm pointing at where he normally sits his desk. Our Jacobin's creative director always likes to make fun of Landon Donovan because he'll say shit like, "Well, you just managed to beat Ghana 2-1 in extra time. How'd you manage to do that?" "Oh, well, I really think it was the American spirit. We just gritted it out. We're Americans. We know how to survive." And he's talking about a bunch of fucking Ghanaians who had hardly like 1/10 the opportunities that maybe the American players had and whatever else. But it was the American spirit that persevered. And I think his playing up the U.S. as this gritty underdog team instead of just a very solid mediocre team, which is I think the hard juxtaposition. But yeah, I think Dempsey is kind of underrated. Americans also just don't know how to rate. I was actually serious about Claudio Reyna. Americans don't know how to rate. Like Americans will see a defensive midfielder and be like, "What in the world am I looking at?"
To your point about children of successful athletes now being very Gio Reyna, Claudio Reyna's son, is actually playing really well for Borussia Dortmund, one of the bigger teams in Germany. He's playing really well, and he looks like he's going to be like one of the best American players of all time. Like he's got the talent to become, he's part of like that generation with Pulisic, and that is just, they look like they could maybe take it to a new level. But like it is the child of the former greatest American player of all time, now looking like he could be really good.
Okay, yeah, I actually didn't know anything about him. I should say to Donovan's credit, he played pretty well in Europe, like when he was he was on loan at Everton and whatever else.
Yeah.
So he was solid. He was fine. I just most annoying commentator ever. Actually, that's probably I say Lawless, but anyway. I think I really appreciate you hopping on at the last minute.
Man.
I don't think we have any pressing questions. I think you got to a lot of the mystique of Maradona, and also why I think people really treasured him when he was around, because there will never be another Maradona, and that's one obviously testimony to his skills as a footballer, but also because the environment that created Maradona just doesn't exist in many ways. So as you mentioned before, there's the new athlete is totally polished and has an entire staff to look after them. LeBron says that he invests $1 million a year in staff to help him with his body, on top of his team's trainers, which if you consider how much he makes and whatever else and how valuable, his health is, that makes perfect sense. But you have every statement is PR. The moment someone gets traded, they have the Instagram queued up. Thank Detroit. Yeah. This is my dream. This last 6 months, being the 12th man on the Detroit Pistons was just changed my world. You'll forever be in my heart. Whatever that. Just this very glib, polished thing exists, and also just the feeling that you were watching, something that could just completely go off the rails, and it could either just result in this brilliance this thing in like '86 that we'll never see again in sports, or just the total kind of disastrous train wreck of the '90s. So in a way, I always relate that to left politics, because we feel like we're trying to recreate some of the glories that came with a different era, you know, an era where we had you know, a large mass parties and trade unions and a different kind of civil society, and it seemed like, yeah, the underdogs were probably going to lose, but at least they would put up a fight. So that was my attempt to shoehorn this into politics, but I do appreciate all your time, and I guess we're not going to see you for what, 10 days, 11 days on the channel. So everyone say goodbye to Nando, and I guess we'll be running some other material between now and next Saturday. So starting next week, I think we're off on Friday. Kale, what's anything on Friday?
Yeah, Kale, programming, no, come back in.
Yeah,
we're not doing anything on Friday. Go home, eat some food, watch some old Maradona games.
Yeah.
I don't know, catch up on whatever show you're procrastinating on, or read a book, or I don't know. Go read the Verso books that we plug every week.
Yeah.
No, they're not paying for this spot. Shit.
No.
Yeah,
listen to my We Came to Win episode about Maradona. Would be a good.
Oh yeah,
Right.
that was really, really well done, and the entire team on that, like, that's like the best produced shit I've listened to. It sounded like The Daily or something. You know. That's high praise, by the way. You know, I'm a Brooklyn PMC type now, so.
Yeah.
Go listen to all of Nando's old, better produced material, and then come back to us.
No.
the following week.
Nando is in his Napoli stage of his career now, right? Hopefully without the drug abuse. But anyway, beautiful. That's beautiful. On that note, let's call it for a few days. So thanks everyone. Press like, press subscribe. Please check out Weekends. Nando does a great job with that show every Saturday, but not this Saturday.
Later, guys.
All right. Take care.